So delegation, and what as managers do we need to be able to understand and to be good at when it comes to delegation? So delegation, first of all, what is it? Is the assigning of authority to another person to carry out specific activities. So as we looked at in one of our earlier chapters, the idea of authority and responsibility are kind of go hand in hand. And so by assigning that authority to the other person, they're also taking responsibility for whatever those activities are. There's a distinction that is made though in terms of the a distinction in terms of participative decision making in which authority is shared. So if you come together with a group of people and you all participate in the decision that is made, that authority and the responsibility is shared. Whereas with delegation, you're actually giving over that authority to somebody else and enabling them to make those decisions on their own. So generally speaking, if we're thinking of a large corporate organisation with a lot of tiers in it, we can think of effective delegation as kind of driving down from the top, where authority is given and delegated down through the chain of command to different levels. And so if we want to delegate effectively, there's a few key things that we can do. And for a lot of people, particularly early in their careers, delegation can be quite a challenge. It can be difficult to let go of things that either you enjoy doing or that you have held on to a responsibility for. And so you still feel that sense of responsibility for managing those tasks or delivering those tasks. So handing them over to somebody else can feel a little bit like handing over your responsibilities to somebody else. So it's important to be able to, one, let go, but also make it clear that you are still there to support that person. So we want to do that firstly by clarifying what the actual project or the scope of the delegation is. So is it a discrete thing that they will do for a period of time because it's a one-off project perhaps, or is it that they'll have ongoing responsibility for something? What exactly will they then be responsible and have authority to do? We also want to specify the range of discretion. So in some cases, like often in organisations, people will be delegated authority for certain spending limits. So you might, as a manager, be given discretion to spend up to authorise expenditure up to, say, $5,000. And then at the next level of management, you might have discretion to spend up to $15,000, et cetera, up the chain. And so that is giving a very specific range of discretion in which, as that person delegated that authority, you can make decisions as long as it doesn't exceed that particular price point. That obviously becomes a little bit more complicated when it's not dollar amounts, but actual decisions. And so as managers who are delegating, we also have to be accepting of the fact that people will make mistakes, particularly as they're starting out. And that can make it quite difficult as well, because you know that you can do that job perfectly, or you've been doing it before, so you know how to do it. And it can be very challenging to see somebody else either struggling with a task that you know how to do easily, or making errors while they're trying to do it. But as a process of delegation, being there to assist that person and build their skills. So you want to have their back, but not make them feel like they don't actually have any say in what is being done. So this balancing act sort of comes into play, where we're both trying to support and encourage the person, but not undermine them or take over. So allowing them to have the discretion to the level that they're allowed to, and for that discretion level to be clear in some way, is really important, because otherwise you're just going to be sort of doing a to and fro where you sort of give it to them, but then you take it back. You also want employees to be able to participate. So you can let them have a say. So let's say, for example, you decide that a particular task you don't have scope for anymore, and so you want to delegate that task to a particular person. You obviously want to choose somebody who you think is capable of either doing the job or being able to do the job over time, and ask them rather than sort of just handballing it to them. Sometimes you may need to handball it to them, and you would then explain that to them in a way that is empowering for them. It doesn't make them feel like they've just had something else dumped on their plate, but that they are assisting you, assisting the team, and also growing their level of responsibility and enhancing their scope of practice in terms of their role and their job. So allowing them to have that ownership over that delegated authority is also key to them actually feeling like they have that responsibility over the task now. And so we want to make it known to people who need to know. So the people either within the team or within the scope of that task or project, that person now has that delegated authority. And so if you want to know anything about that thing, you need to talk to that person now. And so it can be as simple as that, just letting people know, this person is now responsible for this project. So if you've got any questions about it, feel free to direct them to them. And that way people now know, oh, all right, this person is responsible for this now. And then we also want to establish feedback controls. So this is where, again, this balancing act becomes important between not monitoring them so hard that they feel micromanaged and like there's someone looking over their shoulder all the time, but feeling like someone has their back, and that they can come back to you if they get stuck or they want some kind of assistance. So being able to think through, how are you going to actually understand if this person is doing a good job or not? How might you observe that? How might you measure it in some way? Or how might you establish the communication channel with that person so that they can tell you, or you can understand anything that they're struggling with in terms of their new delegated authority, so that then you can work to either bring them resources or assistance as needed. So there's a whole bunch of contingency factors, so things that affect delegation in terms of influencing it in some way, shape or form. The first of these is the actual size of the organisation. So as you can imagine, the bigger the organisation, there's more people, more moving parts, there's a lot more decisions that need to be made. And so you tend to get a lot of delegation happening in large organisations. In smaller organisations where the leaders of the organisation can be across a lot more detail, there tends to be less delegation. There's also the importance of the actual task or decision. So the more important it is, the more likely it's going to fall as a responsibility of a senior manager, and so it's less likely to be delegated. So it kind of goes hand in hand with the idea of authority and responsibility, that the higher your level of authority and responsibility, the more important decisions you have to make. And so how important the decision or the job is will determine the degree to which it's delegated or not. In addition, the complexity of the task, right? So if you have a very, very complex task, they will tend to be handled by top management purely because they tend to have the greater level of knowledge and experience related to that. There may be very specific tasks that are delegated to a particular team. So say if we're designing some new piece of equipment that is very complex, or we're an organization and then we're going to get someone to code something for us, then we might delegate that to people who have particular skills in that discrete area. But generally speaking, the more complex the task, the more it's likely to fall on top management. The organisational culture. So you may have encountered different levels of organisational culture where delegation is the norm or not. And so in some cultures, delegation is kind of feared almost, because people want to feel like they're on top of everything and they've got control over what's going on. Whereas other organizations can almost have too much delegation, where it almost feels like the top managers just kind of don't care what's happening, and just sort of want to have an easy life. And so they'll just delegate. And then what tends to happen is that people then end up with more authority than they actually should have, because they don't necessarily have the authority in the organization, but they've been given this authority over tasks and projects, and are kind of running with it and trying their best. But then if it all goes pear-shaped, they don't in the end have the authority, and they will kind of be, there'll be punitive results for them. And then the last contingency factor is the actual nature of the employees. So if you're working with a team that doesn't necessarily have the skills and abilities and motivation to accept authority, maybe you're working with a lot of inexperienced people who might be young, or just don't have the life experience, that you then could have expectations of them to take on the responsibility for certain tasks, then you would probably not necessarily give them those responsibilities, because that wouldn't be fair or reasonable. And so you want to be working based on the actual nature of the employees that you're working with, in order to ensure that they are able to deliver on the authority that you're giving them.